Hey fly tyers, Darren here. Welcome back to another fly tying tutorial. Today we're going to be tying a pattern called the fish taco. This is a pattern designed by angler and tyer Jeff Hickman. He designed this while he was looking for a quick unweighted fly that would give a nice profile in all different speeds of current. So this one is quick to tie and it gives a nice shoulder. It's got a bit of a wider profile, and these long stringy pieces of ostrich herl really undulate in the current and give a lot of action to the fly. It's got a buggy body, which over time, the longer that it's fished and that dubbing gets pulled out, the better it's going to look underwater. Just got a minimal amount of flash just to give it a little boost. Let's have a look at the material list and get started. Alright, let's start by getting a fresh shank into the jaws of the vise, and I've got a prepared 30mm shank with a 20-pound leash tied on there. I'll put a link in the description where you can find that tutorial. And for thread, I'm using a Flymaster 6/0, that's a 70 denier thread in fluorescent pink. We'll just start by wrapping on near the tag end there. We're just going to create a small butt section, about 7mm or so. And for that I'm using a fluorescent fuchsia or fluorescent pink Senyo laser Dubb. We'll just take a small bunch here and we're just going to twist that onto the tying thread. This is how I like to twist most of my dubbing on, and just kind of feed it on there just a little bit at a time, and then I'll wrap that. And depending on the length of the body, it might take 2 or 3 wraps of dubbing on there. So if you get any that kind of straggles along, you can just twist it into the next bunch. We just want to kind of isolate that there. Next we're going to take a piece of medium uni-French oval tinsel, and this one is gold. So we'll take a small length of that. We don't need a lot. I'm going to take about 6 inches, and that's probably enough for 2 to 3 flies. So then we'll take that and we'll just tie that along the shank just close to us. Just want to make sure that it's secured, and you've got a bit of ridging on the oval tinsel, so you don't really need to fold it back. Next we're going to take some black Senyo dubbing or laser dubbing, and this is a bit of a mix that I did on my own a while back with a little bit of blue highlight in there. And again, we'll just twist on a dubbing noodle and we'll wrap that forward. You just want to make sure that you leave yourself a little bit of room there at the front so we can build up our collars and our head. So we'll add a little bit more dubbing there. We'll start wrapping that back. We just want to build a body that's fairly uniform in thickness, and make sure we go back to where we meet the butt section there. That's probably enough dubbing. Didn't use all of it, but we got a nice uniform body there. So we'll just clean that up, kind of build a bit of a base for our collars in the front. Next we're going to use a Grizzly hackle that's been dyed pink. We'll just strip off some of the fibers near the bottom at the base, and we'll snip that. And we're going to tie that in with the shiny side out and the dull side in towards the body. So when we palmer that backwards, it's going to be to the front we'll have the shiny side, and to the rear the dull side, and that gives a nice kind of a really nice woolly bugger profile. Fold that stem back, just make sure it's locked in place, and now we'll start wrapping that hackle backwards. And for this, I like to keep the wraps fairly close if I've got a nice long feather. And we'll get that back to the point where the tinsel's tied in, and then we're going to come forward and we're going to reverse wrap through that hackle. You just want to make sure that you kind of wiggle that as you wrap forward, so you're not trapping down a whole lot of the hackle fibers. You just kind of wiggle that out in front, make sure we're not trapping anything. And then we'll take a couple wraps just to make sure that gets locked into place. We'll fold that oval tinsel to lock it in place and trim it off. Alright, let's just snap off the back end there. And if you want, you can take a brush and just kind of pull out a little bit of that dubbing. Gives it a little bit more support, the hackle a bit more support, so that when you're putting on the ostrich, you got a bit of body underneath there, so it helps kind of shape the fly a little bit. Alright, next we're going to take some herl. I've got both pink and black for this pattern, but this is a pretty easy pattern to modify, so of course just use the colors that you want. You kind of see at the base, at the bottom, the fibers are a little bit thicker, and near the tip they're a little bit thinner, and I think they flow a little nicer here. So we're going to use herls from the front, and we're just going to take a few out at a time, and we're going to tie those around the circumference of the shank, just one or two at a time. And we just want to make sure that we kind of distribute those around the outside of the fly. It's a nice collar, and I'd say we probably use around a dozen to 16 fibers of each color, so in the end I've probably got between 24 and 36 herls around the outside, just to kind of make up a nice long collar. So when I do those one or two at a time, just to make sure that they don't clump together and that we get a nice even distribution around the hook shank, or the fly tying shank. So once I got all the pink ones in, I'll just kind of wrap it towards the hackle, just to kind of tighten that up a little bit, and then I push in the butt ends. It just makes it a little bit easier to trim those off. And we'll just go through, cut them all off one by one. This is probably the most finicky part of this fly pattern, but as you can see, it gives a nice result. We could probably strip off the herls if we soak this, similar to what we do with rhea feather, but I don't know that you're saving a lot of time doing it that way, and this way you know that the herls are definitely tied in securely. So now we're going to do the same thing with the black. We'll just take a few at a time. If you've got some smaller ones that are broken, make sure you pull those out and you're not going to tie those in. So just use your best judgment where you place these. Again, you just want to have a nice even distribution. So the main idea of having these tentacles or tendrils in there is to help impart motion and capture the natural motion of the current of the stream or the river. And you'll see once you get this wet and it just follows the curve, the movement of the water like nothing else. And once we have all those tied in, we'll just pull all the tips of the butt ends back. And it doesn't hurt if you wrap a thread in there. It kind of helps push those out so then you can come through and trim them off really easily. Just want to make sure you don't cut your thread while you're doing this. Done that a number of times. And one other thing that I like to do is just to take all those herls and push them forward and kind of give them a kink going the other way. And I'll sometimes throw in a wrap or two of thread in behind there just to help prop those out a little bit. Just gives it a little bit of help, giving it a bit of a stronger shoulder. If you really wanted to, you could probably put a disc in here just to help pop those out, or even use a little bit of UV resin just to kind of secure them in place. So you can see that kind of gives it a little bit more of a shoulder there. So clean up those the head a little bit. Next we're going to take in a piece of guinea fowl feather, and this is guinea fowl dyed pink. It's a large one, and we're just going to pull those fibers back and we're going to tie that in by the tip. This is just a nice way to kind of finish off that fly. Kind of helps rein in all the peacock herl as well. I like to fold that tip back just to make sure that it's locked in place. And then we'll pluck out the center portion there. And now we're going to just palmer that feather and wrap it. We've got a bit of a weird shape on the stem, so it doesn't pull back quite as nicely as a hackle or a marabou feather would, but the little bit of finesse you can get it to do what you want there. And then we'll just lock that in place with a few thread wraps, and we're going to try and clean up the head of the fly as we go along. Just make sure you tie that stem and make sure it's locked in place there before we trim it. So one last thing we're going to add to this is just a couple pieces of Flashabou. This is a light pink, and I'm going to take about 4 strands of this and just I'm going to tie them on at the head here. I don't want to clump them, I just want to kind of spread them over, a couple on each side. And I'll tie them in at the full length, and then I'll just come in and trim them at the back, equal length with the ostrich herl. And then I'll take those butt ends in the front and just kink those and trim them off. Now I'll just clean up the head of the fly. Just gives a nice presentation, makes sure that everything's locked in place. And we'll get our whip finish tool here. Nice thing about the length of this is you can set all those materials in the material clip and keep them out of the way. So we'll get our whip finish one and another one just to make sure, just in case for insurance purposes. Trim that. And one more thing we're going to do for insurance, we're just going to get a little bit of bone dry, and we're going to coat the head with the bone dry here. Now here, if you get a little bit of the bone dry on the hackle near the front, that'll just help build the shoulder on it, and just kind of pull those hackles out before we set the UV, the bone dry, just to make sure that it's, if we get any on the hackles itself, they're not going to be pinned back. And there you go, we got that zapped. We're good to go. This fly is ready for the box and ready for the fish. Hey fly tyers, thanks for stopping by and watching my fly tying video. Make sure you're subscribed and hit that bell icon to get notified on the latest fly patterns, tips, and reviews. If you enjoyed the video, take a second and hit that like button. If you have any questions or comments, you can post them below in the comments section. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for your support of the channel, and until next time, this is Darren saying, keep a hook in your vise. Cheers.